when your old life stops responding to you. Something strange happens when a life reaches the end of its usefulness. Not the end you expect, not a collapse, not a dramatic moment where everything explodes at once. It's quieter than that. It feels more like pressing on a surface that no longer pushes back. You still show up, you still try. You still move through the same routines, but nothing answers you the way it used to. At first, it's subtle. The things that once motivated you now feel strangely flat. Achievements don't land, plans don't excite. The future you were working toward no longer pulls you forward. It's not that something is wrong. It's that something has stopped responding. It's that something has gone silent. Most people interpret this moment incorrectly. They call it burnout, or boredom, or loss of discipline. They assume the problem is internal, that something inside them needs to be fixed, adjusted, optimized. But what if that's not true? What if the issue isn't you? What if the life you built has simply finished saying what it needed to say? There's a difference between losing motivation and losing resonance. Motivation is mental. Resonance is structural. When resonance disappears, effort feels pointless. Not because you're lazy, but because the system you're pushing against is no longer active. Like speaking into a room where the echo has vanished. This is usually when people panic. They double down. They force productivity. They chase stimulation. They try to recreate meaning by amplifying noise, but noise doesn't restore response. It only hides the silence temporarily. And the silence is actually the message. When an old life stops responding, it's rarely because it failed. More often, it's because it completed its function. It shaped you. It trained you. It taught you how to move, survive, adapt, perform. And now, it has nothing left to teach, so it goes quiet. This is not a spiritual awakening moment. It doesn't come with light or certainty. It comes with confusion. With the uncomfortable sense that you're still inside something that no longer recognizes you. You might notice it in conversations first. You're present, but not really there. Words bounce around, yet nothing connects. You respond appropriately, but internally, something is already elsewhere. Not dreaming, not fantasizing, just not engaged. You might notice it in goals. You achieve something and wait for the feeling to arrive, and it doesn't. There's no celebration inside you, no relief. Just a quiet acknowledgement. So, this is it. Or you notice it in routine. The days are functional, efficient, predictable, but empty in a way you can't explain, without sounding ungrateful. So you don't explain it, you just carry it. Here's what's important to understand. This phase is not asking you to act. It's asking you to notice. When a structure stops responding, the instinct is to replace it immediately. New goals, new identities, new beliefs. But rushing to replacement is how people miss the transition entirely, because something else is happening beneath the surface. Something quieter. When the old life goes silent, perception sharpens. Not dramatically, gradually. You start seeing patterns you once ignored. How much of your life was based on momentum instead of intention? How many choices were made because they were available, not because they were aligned? How often meaning was outsourced to outcomes instead of presence? This realization isn't comforting. It doesn't feel empowering. It feels destabilizing. Because the scaffolding that held everything together is no longer trustworthy. At this point, many people ask the wrong question. They ask, what should I do next? But that question comes too early. The better question is, what am I no longer willing to pretend is working? There's a subtle grief in this phase. Not grief for something lost, but grief for something outgrown. For a version of yourself that functioned perfectly inside a smaller world, for a system that once rewarded effort and now offers only silence. This is why the transition feels lonely. Not because others disappear, but because fewer and fewer things feel real enough to respond to. Here's the part that often goes unnoticed. When your old life stops responding, it's not rejecting you. It's releasing you. Systems don't cling. They complete their cycle and dissolve. Only humans cling, because uncertainty feels threatening. But uncertainty is not the danger here. Avoiding observation is. There's a narrow window in this phase, a space where you can either fill the silence with distraction or listen to it. Listening doesn't mean waiting for instructions. It means resisting the urge to immediately define what comes next. It means allowing the gap to exist without explanation. This gap is uncomfortable because identity hasn't caught up yet. You no longer belong fully to what was, but you haven't formed what's next, so you're unplaced, unresponsive life outside, undefined self inside. This is where people rush. They adopt new labels, new paths, new philosophies, not because they're wrong, but because they're early. If you stay just a little longer in the observation phase, something different happens. You stop asking life to respond, and you start noticing how you respond differently. What drains you now that once felt neutral? What feels heavy that once felt normal? What situations require explanation instead of presence? These aren't problems, they're signals. Not telling you where to go, but showing you where you no longer are. When the old life goes silent, it creates space. Not space to fill, space to recalibrate. Perception before action, attention before direction. This channel exists in that space, not to give you a new life, not to define the next phase, only to sit with the moment where the old one stops answering. Because that moment is not a failure, it's a threshold. If you're here, and this feels familiar, nothing is required of you. You don't need to decide, you don't need to change. You don't need to understand. Just notice. Notice what no longer responds. Notice what no longer fits. Notice what you no longer push against. The next life doesn't arrive with noise or urgency. It arrives quietly after you stop demanding that the old one speak again. And until then, stay with the observation. That's where the real transition begins.